On the 24th of October, 1534, placards against the mass, transubstantiation, and the regimen as well as the faith of the Catholic church were posted up during the night in the thoroughfares of Paris, and at Blois on the very chamber door of Francis I., whose first glance, when he got up in the morning, they caught. They had been printed at Neufchatel in Switzerland, where the influence of the refugee William Farel was strong, and their coarse violence of expression could not fail to excite the indignation of even the most indifferent Catholics. In their fanatical blindness, factions say only what satisfy their own passions, without considering moral propriety or the effect which will be produced by their words upon the feelings of their adversaries, who also have creeds and passions. Francis I., equally shocked and irritated, determined to give the Catholic faith striking satisfaction, and Protestant audacity a bloody lesson. On the 21st of January, 1535, a solemn procession issued from the church of Saint Germain Auxerrois. John du Bellay, Bishop of Paris, held in his hands the Holy Sacrament, surrounded by the three sons of France and the Duc de Vendome, who were the dais bearers, and the king walked behind, with a taper in his hand, between the Cardinals of Bourbon and Lorraine. At each halting place he handed his taper to the Cardinal of Lorraine, folded his hands, and, humbly prostrating himself, implored divine mercy for his people. After the procession was over, the king, who had remained to dine with John du Bellay, assembled in the great hall of the palace the heads of all the companies, and, taking his place on a sort of throne which had been prepared for him, said, "Whatever progress may have already been made by the pest, the remedy is still easy if each of you, devoured by the same zeal as I, will forget the claims of flesh and blood to remember only that he is a Christian, and will denounce without pity all those whom he knows to be partisans or favorers of heresy. As for me, if my arm were gangrened, I would have it cut off, though it were my right arm; and if my sons who hear me were such wretches as to fall into such execrable and accursed opinions, I would be willing to give them up to make a sacrifice of them to God."
During the night of the 18th of October, 1534, the doors of the cathedral and town halls of Paris, Rouen, Meaux, and other cities, even to the gates of the castle of Amboise, where was the king, were covered with placards assailing in the grossest terms the mysteries of the Catholic faith, denying the Mass, the Host, the prayers for the dead, whatever was held most mystical and sacred. Nothing could be more brutal than the feeling which prompted this offence, unless it be the feeling which punished it. All that was tender and holy was publicly outraged here: the mysterious sacrifice of the Mass, the faith that rescued the dear but sinful dead from the pains of purgatory. More than this, in Paris there stood an image of the Mother and Child, held especially venerable and beloved. Many prayers were addressed to this succorable Madonna. Her image in the public street brought to the roughest heart a reminder of gentleness and purity. This dawn of the 19th of October shone upon a desecrated shrine. The head of the Virgin, the head of the Babe, had been rudely chopped from the trunks and lay fallen and mutilated in the gutter. When the king heard of it, he burst into tears. That cruel blunder, that heartless revenge, lost the cause of the Reform. Many a stake should smoke, and many a rack should strain and creak, in expiation of that murdered stone. This affair of the placards sent a horror pulsing throughout the length and breadth of France. It frightened from the Reform its gentler and more reverent adherents. Margaret herself, ever compassionate, felt it necessary to declare her Catholicism to the world. Francis henceforth became no less combative than the Sorbonne itself. He set out at once for Paris to sift the matter. No sooner had he reached the capital when, in the space of a single night, the placards burst out again in hideous flower. They were on all the buildings, all the churches. Even into the king's cabinet they brought their obscene and scurrilous defiance. A vague fear and horror took possession of the town. All through France throbbed that sense of outraged pity for the murdered Redeemer, which lay at the bottom of medieval persecution, blent with that maddening terror of supernatural evil which gave their keenest edge to the cruelties that punished witchcraft. Heresy was indeed a sort of witchcraft, a spell wasting the souls of men before the fires of hell, even as the grosser witches knew how to make men's bodies melt and wane. It is difficult now to place ourselves in this attitude, yet unless we do so, we can never understand the lesson of the past. When the king heard of the Virgin's mutilated image, he burst, as I have said, into tears. But his anger was not to end in weeping. A severe inquiry was instituted, and all accused of complicity in this matter were brought to Paris and tried there. The party of the Sorbonne pretended that they had discovered a Protestant plot to murder all good Catholics while at Mass. Nothing can be less founded than such a charge, obviously trumped up to secure a conviction. Without it, the conviction was secure. 24 of the accused were sentenced to be burnt to death. On the 29th of January, 1535, a great expiatory procession traversed Paris from the Louvre to the Church of Notre Dame. The king walked in this procession bareheaded, holding in his hand a lighted torch. He was followed by his children and the flower of his court. His beautiful mistress was there with Queen Leonor and many fair and joyous ladies, but Margaret had returned to Navarre. She had left Paris heavy-hearted some weeks before, seeing, as it seemed, all her dreams of wide culture, beneficence, and toleration crumble suddenly into nothing, and the old reign of darkness engulf the world once more. Indeed, on that morning of the 21st of January, 1535, the Renaissance, the Collège of France, the treaty with the Turks, appeared shocking and anomalous, for Paris had returned to medievalism. It might have been Louis XI, and not King Francis, who walked there bareheaded holding his lighted torch. To the sound of solemn chants, the procession wound through the streets. Not only the court was there, and the king and queen, and the 200 gentlemen of the royal household, but the whole Sorbonne, triumphant over the absent Queen of Navarre. The clergy of Paris, the Swiss guards, the heralds, the court of Parliament, the municipality, the guilds of capital, the courts of the realm. It was a procession of several thousand persons, all alike in their pity and their burning indignation, that marched from the Louvre to Notre Dame. When we realize this, we understand the sequel. We understand how little yet, for all its brilliant veneer of culture, France was impregnate with the true modern spirit. The Middle Ages were reared up close behind, and their tremendous shadows fell across that world to darken it. At Notre Dame there was High Mass, thence the procession moved to the Bishop's Palace, where, seated on a throne, the king addressed the multitude. In his words, burning, thrilling with medieval passion, we catch no echo of the familiar speech of the father of letters. The debonair, free-thinking dilettante of the Renaissance has disappeared. The mutilated image of the Virgin has roused in his place the latent fanatic, present ever behind the most modern shows of the double-natured 16th century. Louis the Saint or Louis the Cruel might have spoken as he spoke. So easily a strong passion refutes the painful progress of centuries. The multitude stood in the hall, and in the court outside, the king on his raised throne spoke to them, the tears in his eyes. He spoke of the blasphemy and profanation, and of that day's expiation. He denounced the enemies of God and the Church. And if my own right arm, he cried at last, were infected with this heretic pestilence, I would cut it off and cast it from me. And if one of my own children were so miserable as to favor it, I would with my own hand sacrifice him to God's justice and my own.